The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. As you may have surmised or seen in the chat box, we've had a bit of a challenging technical start. So my name is Dale Haas with the Energy Services Coalition, and I'm actually standing in for Alice Doshik, which many of you know, who is generally the host for these webinars as a member of the United States Department of Energy's Better Buildings Initiative. Our role is to welcome you to session 3 of the Better Buildings 5-part ESPC webinar series. These sessions explore the tools and resources of DOE's Energy Savings Performance Contracting Toolkit. Today's session will take a look at the resources available to help state and local governments establish the building blocks for a permanent ESPC process and infrastructure. These blocks include building and maintaining a network of ESPC supporters and establishing a suite of technical assistance services for project owners. Next slide. In our remaining time, we'll start off the discussion with an overview of some very interesting research conducted in the last couple of years by the Energy Services Coalition, or ESC, the organization with a mission to promote energy savings performance contracting. You will hear Jim Arwood and myself, Dale Haas of ESC, discuss the common building blocks we've identified in states with successful ESPC programs. Together, these blocks form a strong foundation and permanent infrastructure for performance contracting. ESC's findings paved the way for some of the tools included in the ESPC toolkit and introduced nicely the theme for today's webinar. Alice will follow with a look at the resources in the toolkit that can help you establish some of the building blocks discussed, whether you're interested in establishing a centralized program for technical assistance or developing a network of ESPC champions to spur and support ESPC projects in your jurisdiction. Before we get started on today's program, please note that we'll hold questions until after the presentation, but you can enter your question anytime throughout this presentation through the chat box on your webinar screen. Then we'll fit them together as time allows at the end of the presentations. The session will be archived and posted for your reference on the internet. Slide 3, please. As is typical to this webinar series, there is typically a couple of polls to help us tailor our remarks to be most useful for you. When the poll question comes up on your screen, please select the one sector that most closely fits yours. Okay, and we can see the results here. It looks like a little over a third are from private sector businesses, or ESCOs, followed by state government, then local government, and then nonprofit, and finally some federal government participants. So we appreciate that, you sharing that information. And then there is a second poll here. Again, when the question appears on the screen, please select the one response that most closely matches your role in the process. Okay, and as you can see on your screen, just as I can, that nearly half the folks participating are involved in initiating and developing projects. And then there's a split of advisors and other, and then oversight providers bring up the balance. So we appreciate your input on the polls. It's really important to understand who the audience is in these presentations and make sure that we're doing our best to tailor our remarks to you. So at this point, we're going to move to the presentation from the Energy Services Coalition regarding these building blocks that we call key attributes.
And thank you, Dale. I'm Jim Arwood with the Energy Services Coalition, and I will be joined by Dale Hawes on this. And Dale and I are excited to share the ESC analysis of key attributes and statewide guaranteed energy savings performance contracting success. The challenge is going to be doing this in 20 minutes as Dale has spent the last 15 years or longer analyzing this relationship, and I've spent a good part of the last 3 to 4 years. That said, this is also the third time in the last decade the ESC has engaged in this effort to identify programmatic design key attributes and their relationship to success at the state and local level. And each time we've done this activity, the participation from our state partners, our public partners, has increased, and we've gained additional insight into what makes for a successful program. As you can see here, I hope everyone on the call is familiar with the Energy Services Coalition. We are a public-private partnership that has been working with states throughout the country since 1999. Prior to 1999, we were a regional group with a focus strictly on Western states. Our primary purpose for all these years has been to support and to facilitate the development and improvement of guaranteed energy savings performance contracting programs at the state level. Next slide, Dale. You heard earlier talk about key attributes. Most people in the public and private sectors associate the ESC with the 10 key attributes to programmatic design. Now, the ESC didn't create these attributes. Rather, our relationship with states allowed us to observe the successes achieved by state programs and analyze those programs and their attributes. And from this observation and analysis, a list of best practices emerged. And so for the last 20 years, that is what we've been doing. In short, the key attributes we'll talk about today are the core elements we've observed over the years that are necessary for an effective statewide program. I talked about the long history with identifying the key attributes. This slide and the next give a brief timeline of that history. Notice it was a little over a decade ago, the last one there, 2007, that the best practices model program evolved into key attributes. And in 2007, with the support of the Department of Energy, the ESC began to study and subsequently compile the elements of state programs that were most effective and efficient. And this study revealed the 10 key attributes that have proven to accelerate the success of programs in every way. So next slide, Dale. 2 years after the launch of the Key Attribute Initiative, so in 2009, 17 states participated in our first review of program design. And each state was asked the number of type of key attributes in place and the amount of investment that had been realized. And the key stat here on this slide, as you can see in 2009, the average number of key attributes per state was 4.54 out of 10. And I apologize for those that may be unfamiliar with the term key attribute. In a couple minutes, Dale will discuss each in more detail, and this number 4.54 will make more sense. Next slide. In 2011, the states participating in the second review of programmatic attributes increased from 17 to 22. And we, as an organization, the ESC, had spent 2 years at this time promoting a model program based on the 10 key attributes. And we also saw during this period of time an increase in the average number of key attributes adoption from the participating states. The average increased from the 4.54 to the 5.54. And you see the bullet there at the bottom of the page, Arizona example. And I was the energy office director in Arizona during this time frame. And when we started, roughly in the 2006-2007 timeframe, Arizona had one key attribute. We had enabling legislation that allowed for energy savings performance contracting. And over the previous 10 to 15 years prior to that time, Arizona had reported slightly more than $30 million in investment in projects statewide. And mainly these were all in the universities. By 2011, at the time of this second review, we had adopted 7 of the 10 key attributes with the help of the ESC, and the investment in GSPC projects increased to several $100 million. And so now I realize there were other contributing factors at that time, but I'm confident that a great amount of this increase was from our establishing a program. We got buy-in from the governor, support of various decision makers, established a chapter, did benchmarking, reporting, the key attributes that you'll hear about in a few moments. So, but this relationship isn't just restricted to Arizona. We've seen significantly more investment in performance contracting in states recognized as ESC champion states. And we'll talk about champion states in quite a bit of detail throughout this webinar. And these are the leader states, and they were selected based on a combination of key attribute adoption and the amount of recent investment in projects in their state. So next slide, Dale. There we are. We recently completed the most recent review between 2016 and 2018. This is the third review that I spoke to a few moments ago. This round, we had 34 states participate, and the number of key attribute adoption per state had increased to 6.174 out of 10. And when looking at our champion or leader states, this number was even higher at 8.5. So next slide, Dale. There were a number of key takeaways from this review, and I've listed a few of them here. I won't dwell on them, as I know Dale is going to cover these as he walks through the 10 key attributes and the trends we observed from this latest review. Dale, I will turn it over to you if you want to launch into the key attributes and take it away.
Great, thanks, Jim. And for our attendees, what we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the key attribute and some critical components of each attribute, and then Jim's going to share some statistical information from these studies that help reinforce the value of each of the attributes. So let's start with this one. I really always enjoy starting with the first key attribute being enabling legislation, because let's face it, if it's not legal, you shouldn't do it. Within the model legislation and within most states' legislation now, they talk about the different applications of funding, all these components that you see there. But some of the things that are also incredibly important in that enabling legislation is that will define whether your program does or does not require a guarantee, something that we think is extraordinarily important. It may assign which department, could be the State Energy Office, could be a General Services Division or a Facilities Division, and how they can have a leadership role in establishing a program. It may provide for funding for the program and actually establish a means for assessing and collecting fees from the projects that can help support or make each program a self-funding program long-term. And then incredibly important, enabling legislation will almost inevitably have a non-appropriation clause within it. And this is a part of the key issue in how Guaranteed Energy Savings Performance Contracting was originally established, that allows this work not to be considered debt. Over the course of time, there are a lot of challenges about that. The non-appropriation clause in the enabling legislation is a fundamental of that consideration.
And the key attributes, when we did this review, some of the questions that we asked of the states participating, one of them was your statutes. Do you have one statute that covers all sectors, or are we looking at individual statutes for specific market segments? And so here on this slide, you will see that 6 of the 10 champion states, and these are the states that adopted the most key attributes and had a corresponding the most significant amount of investment in performance contracting. 6 of the 10 champion states had separate legislation for each market sector. And this is an important thing. We didn't notice this level of response from the other states. Why don't you move to the next one, Dale? I think the next one is the states requiring a guarantee, and Dale mentioned that a little earlier. 100% of the champion states, our leader states, again, had in legislation a requirement for a savings guarantee, and this compared to 71% of other states. And I'll let you go there, Dale.
Sure. I might just digress for just a second and share with you that when I think about key attributes, I remember years ago when people would say, well, what's the silver bullet to establishing these programs and making them be effective and actually grow the market achievement? And you've all heard this colloquialism. It's not a silver bullet. What you're hearing about that we call key attributes might look a little bit like the silver buckshot. So just giving that reference as a frame. When we think about the second key attribute listed here, we talk about established gubernatorial support. It is important that each state's governor understand the value and what can be achieved through this non-traditional means of procurement and financing of work. Nearly every state has amassed an extraordinary amount of deferred maintenance, and we're all trying to figure out where the appropriations are going to come from to resolve this. But to establish a program and make it successful, we need to lean on the governor, who has the ability, the unique ability to call together the legal, finance, procurement, landlord agencies, and have them work in concert to establish a program that can be effective. The governors are typically the individuals in the states that establish efficiency goals. And when they set a bar, it provides direction and reinforces the need for these programs to be successful. We've seen governors in the past use their pen to issue executive orders. The most notable was a governor who offered the concept of an executive order that said, no longer send me your budget for capital improvements until you've exhausted all opportunities to use guaranteed energy savings performance contracting. We call that GESPC first. And finally, the governor can put a real formal icing on this cake of work through press releases, through public appearances, ribbon cutting for work, that sort of notoriety to reinforce the effectiveness of this work together. So second key attribute, established gubernatorial support.
And the trend that we saw in our review was that 80% of our leader states, our champion states, reported continuous support from their governors. And this includes transitions from one administration to the next, and in some cases from one party to the other. The difference is stark here. Only 29% of the other states reported the same continuous support from their administrations. And I'll let you go again there, Dale.
And noting that a large part of our audience is from the ESCO community, one of the things that's important about these key attributes is if they're not assembled in a state where you're scratching your head and wondering why additional opportunities aren't more forthcoming, it may be because some of these attributes are missing. So we encourage your thinking about how to support these pragmatic building blocks as well. So consensus decision makers, there was an untold number of programs that the Energy Office worked really hard to stand up, and then they'd find out maybe that the finance group really didn't understand how the money was supposed to move to actually be effectively a part of guaranteed energy savings performance contracting. Who's supposed to pay for this? Is this debt? Is it not debt? Didn't we already appropriate those funds to pay the utility bill and do maintenance and operation? And if we did, how do I use that money and reauthorize it for some other purpose? I mean, all these questions are hard. And what we find out is when the appropriate work is done with procurement, finance, legal, the landlord agency, and the budgeting authorities, that programs get stood up that can be very, very effective, and they aren't questioned at every turn.
During the review, 70% of our champion states, the leader states, reported that they had involvement and support of these key decision makers. And this compared with only 40% in the other states that had the support of their key decision makers. And I think as Dale mentioned earlier, the involvement of these folks in the beginning and continuing involvement really does make for the program to move along, and we've seen where they have completed created complexity if they weren't educated about the process.
Next, we've identified that the states that are most successful have what we've labeled here as program administration. In a more common way, I'd say that the states that are most successful with GESPC, we actually know the face of those programs. We know, and folks that participate in those marketplaces know that this person or that person is the go-to person to find out about the answer to a question, or to reach out to an end user to talk to them about the confidence that they can have in the program and the way it's established. The deployment of this program administrator is just becoming more and more important every day. We do see folks from the private sector sometimes push back and say, look, we don't need this oversight. We don't need anybody checking our work. But it is that very confidence. It is, in fact, the routineness that can be applied to guaranteed energy savings performance contract from established programs that allow those states to be remarkably more successful.
And 90% of the champion states, our leader states, have a program administrator or someone that provides the technical assistance and oversight for the projects. In addition, nearly half of these states, of these champion states, have a third-party owner's rep that either provides a service or assists with the oversight role. In comparison, in the other states, this number, the states that provide project oversight drops to 50%, and for third-party owner reps, it is 29%. And there has been a trend toward this third-party owner's rep over the last few years, and Dale, I think you can probably attest to the fact that 10, 15, 20 years ago when we started this review process, the owner's rep wasn't as common as it is today.
The owner's rep at that point was considered the project champion, which was just the owner's identified person to talk to. And when we talk about owner's reps today, we're actually talking about somebody that has enough expertise and experience in the marketplace to be able to help all parties through the concepts of procurement, the legal issues, the way finances get managed for these projects, and to ensure that the appropriate procurement steps are taken. Not to mention something that's completely unique to this industry, having a full and complete understanding of measurement and verification, how to write the plans.
You are now joining the meeting.
How to write the plans and effectively how to review the reports later. So the next key attribute would be pre-qualified providers. The ESCO community has developed into a very, very strong group of competent and experienced organizations with a host of individuals that really are very, very well served to be good energy partners for projects such as these. However, in every state nearly, we see a program stood up, and then maybe it's a mechanical contractor or a general contractor that says, hey, I could do that too. But they really don't have any understanding of the fundamentals of your enabling legislation or the nuances of a guarantee, or maybe even the financial wherewithal to support that guarantee, mitigating the risk for the end user. We know that it streamlines the processes dramatically by having a pre-qualified set of providers that can actually participate in the program. The owners know who to reach out to invite solicitations for new projects, and the project participants know what their responsibilities are within the program. As a final piece of consideration for pre-qualified ESCOs, and I'm saddened to even have to mention this, but there are cases where projects get, let's just say, outside of the rails. It does happen. One of the real advantages of having pre-qualified ESCOs is, in fact, that all of the participants recognize the need to establish their highest level of production, in quality, and integrity so that they're not eliminated from the program over time. Jim?
I was on mute, I'm sorry. In this latest review, we uncovered that nearly all the champion states, 9 out of 10, have pre-qualified vendors, and this compared to 46% of other states. And I'll turn it back to you, Dale. And are you having audio difficulties?
Well, my thumb got in the way and pressed that silly button, so thank you for catching me. Standardized documents are incredibly important. They enhance the speed from the onset of the project to delivery. They provide for you a well-vetted document that says these are the terms and conditions by which the projects can move forward, leaving the technical information about the project to be completed as part of the contract instruments for that project and schedules and exhibits. Having the standardized approval and knowing that those terms and conditions are fair and equitable and the only ones that are going to be improved only provides confidence to move forward and speed for next project.
And in our champion states, all of our champion states use one or more of the standardized instruments for projects in state government. And this compares to 75% of the other states. And of this, 40% of these state champions, our champion states, extend these documents to the local units of government for their use. And this compares to only 17% of the other states.
Next, a pretty important attribute. If these programs aren't funded in some way, either by a appropriations or self-funding based on small fees being assessed to the projects, well, they simply go away. And we know that the best programs, the most successful programs, have to their benefit a significant amount of time, multiple years of those program offices being well funded so that the work can continue.
And the trend was 60% of the champion states say they have adequate funding, and this, the other states reported only 17% as having adequate funding for their programs.
One of the things that's really challenging for state and large local units of government to fulfill is the outreach and education that it takes to understand this non-traditional means of procurement and finance. Successful programs have incorporated Energy Services Coalition chapters, these 501c3 committees allowing the public and the private groups to come together and A, talk about the things that can advance a program altogether, but B, actually be your agent. Actually be the agent of information that goes to the school facilities program or the superintendent's annual convention or the physical plant director's annual meeting and share the concept in a very unbiased way. Under the banner of ESC, they're presenting the education and the concepts of energy savings performance contracting and not talking about their individual companies. This is a huge help in the promotion of work and making sure that education is provided throughout the communities.
And half of our champion states have an active ESC chapter doing outreach and education activities around the state, while 37% of the other states have an ESC chapter. And as Dale mentioned a minute ago, the performance contracting message is more readily received when it comes from a coalition as opposed to an individual vendor.
Finally, our last attribute, which was a bit of a surprise, whoops, I'm sorry, I've jumped one ahead. Tracking and reporting, incredibly important. Frankly, if you haven't heard about eProject Builder already, you will hear about it. Our Department of Energy friends, with help from the Federal Energy Management Program and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, have created a methodology for national reporting that is really important. One of the real mistakes that we've seen in states over the course of time is they'll stand up a program and they'll have a ribbon cutting announcing that all the negotiations are complete, we're about to start construction. And while that is something to celebrate, they rarely celebrate the fact that we've received the measurement and verification report, hypothetically, let's say in the 6th year, and it still illustrates the persistence of savings and shows us that 105% as an example of the savings are still being achieved regardless of the dynamic changes in the facilities. This tracking and reporting is incredibly important and actually reinforces that this work is essential and can be very, very effective.
And 70% of our champion states require some form of reporting compared to 54% of the other states. And I don't have the figure right handy, but that number drops off when we ask if the reporting is from local units of government versus the state agencies. And going back to one of the key takeaways from earlier in the talk is the disconnect between the state program and the local units of government, and that extends to the reporting as well. And as Dale mentioned about the Project Builder, we also, the ESC will also be doing outreach to state governments this summer, talking to them about their investments data that they've collected, whether it's in the state agencies and or in the local units of government.
So the last key attribute for our discussion today is recognition. And this was a bit of a surprise. In our last work, we found that there were some state programs that had done a remarkable job of having an annual event now and providing awards to powerful strategies, biggest project, most savings, highest % of savings achieved in relationship to the guarantee. That sort of recognition in some states has called for governor staff to be on board at the presentations. This is a big deal. Celebrating the success and recognizing those folks that actually took the time, diligence, and rigor to put together great projects is incredibly important.
And the trend here was that 50% of our champion states, our leader states, have some form of recognition for individual projects compared to 13%. And I think what this has demonstrated, or I hope it has, by comparing what the champion states have in the way of key attributes versus the other 24 states, was that the more the champion states, which was a combination of the adoption of key attributes and investment in performance contracting projects in their state, but the more key attributes that a state has, which you could see in our champion state, in every case, the champion states in the key attribute that we outlined and in our review, the champion states had there were more states among those group of states that had adopted that key attribute into their program for their state. And in some cases, the number is significantly higher than in the other states. But across the board, we saw that the champion states had these elements in their programs on a much higher percentage than the other states.
So I just close this up by saying, you know, it's always my joy to be involved in these presentations, particularly along with Jim Arwood, the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition. And we have this email address that you can reach out to anytime. We'd be glad to share with you, point you to the kinds of resources from this work that have been surmised in a report that you can read and potentially use for your benefit. I'm going to very boldly speak to our organizers and say, at this point, we should be switching slides, and it's my hope that we've technically found Ms. Dosick.
I should be off mute now if you can hear me.
Very good.
I think the last confirms it. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Jim and Dale, for sharing your findings. I always find this very interesting, kind of generally, to talk about the key attributes and how these building blocks go to form the infrastructure for ESPC. I just want to spend a few minutes wrapping up with the toolkit introduction, the next section of our webinar. I know we're running short on time. So the ESPC toolkit, specifically the section on building that permanent infrastructure for regular ESPC projects, is very important. We just heard that, important for success in ESPC, and we just heard that from both Jim and Dale. And several years ago, DOE began offering regular assistance to help state and local governments that were interested in leveraging the performance contracting. In 2014, DOE launched the ESPC Accelerator, and that was one of several such initiatives to enable energy efficiency. And I'll skip forward just a couple of slides you can take a look at how the accelerator, what the profile was, and I will skip ahead to slide 9, if you could please. I can't see the slides, so I will just speak to them. And I'd really like to talk about one area of the accelerator where each partner was asked to select one barrier to ESPC investment to work on. And here we took all of those solutions as well as other solutions that DOE had worked on or that others had worked on that we found to be critical to developing the entire process for ESPC, the decision-making process from whether you should use ESPC all the way through to what did we get out of our ESPC. And here in front of you, you see the homepage for the toolkit and how those solutions were organized. So we organized them into the one package, and then navigation is meant to be along those lines that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. And now for the new information today about this section. And we're here to focus on that third section called Establishing ESPC. And the set of solutions in this part address some of the elements we heard about earlier in the hour. And these resources can help establish ESPC as kind of a business as usual mechanism for moving energy efficiency projects forward. And sometimes we refer to these as the building blocks to support a steady stream of projects as an infrastructure. And sometimes for those who have not heard the full explanation of what that means, like all of you have today, we call it establishing an ESPC program, to clarify that we mean ongoing ESPC support. And so this section of the toolkit includes the resources that you see listed on this slide, that's slide 10, to help users that are interested in developing a permanent ESPC infrastructure. And so I'd like to provide just a one-sentence description of each of the tools for a basic introduction, and that might be all we have time for today. And then I will certainly invite you to contact me directly for a more in-depth discussion of any one of these. So the first document here is the ESPC key attributes, and this resource is really a result of the first study that ESC conducted a few years ago. It's a compilation of those attributes and a kind of a description of what they are and what they mean. And the information that you heard today is so new that I can't really even say that it's hot off the presses because it's not published yet, but there will be a report about this, and it's scheduled to go out in the next week or so. And ESC, Jim and Dale, I assume that will be posted on the ESC website?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, and so we can provide that link when that analysis is ready and posted. The next resource here is guidelines for establishing an ESPC support program. So specifically, it is meant to look at whether you have a staff that is dedicated to helping your state agencies, your local departments, and it's a step-by-step guide to kind of establishing that office with the staffing and overseeing that program over time at either the state or local level, and to offer that technical assistance on an ongoing basis for project owners. The next one, the Virtual Technical Assistant for Download, you've probably heard about its sister version, which is the actual Virtual Technical Assistant, which helps everyone go through the individual steps of an ESPC project. This is the document version that really can be used by a state government or a local government that's interested in providing technical assistance, and it can be downloaded, and then the content can be customized for your particular jurisdiction with legal and other conditions, and then posted on your program website to help ESPC project owners that are in your jurisdiction, and you can direct them at certain points to contact your office or be in compliance with other perhaps program requirements. The next is the networking toolkit, and I kind of refer to both of these, the networking toolkit and the ESPC Champions toolkit right below it, as mini toolkits within the larger ESPC toolkit that we're talking about. And the networking toolkit is a set of resource templates for state and local governments to build and maintain that network of ESPC stakeholders in the jurisdiction that will be critical for supporting and promoting energy savings performance contracting. It's very important to kind of feed and cultivate that network. And the next one, the Champions Toolkit, is a set of resource templates also, but that one is aimed a little bit differently. It's if you have a goal of really spurring more ESPC projects, you can develop and run kind of a core of energy efficiency champions. They might be the facility managers, perhaps, at individual departments or agencies or even individual facilities that then can get together, support each other with the information about ESPC, and then also be the ones to identify potential ESPC projects at their facilities and then promote them to upper management to get approval. And so also a very important tool that is not something that you often have resources around. These are more kind of the people associated tools that are needed. And then finally, 2 examples from states that have put in place this infrastructure successfully. Massachusetts has what it calls the Clean Energy Investment Program, and it's really a mechanism by which they have an established team of folks that they're engineers, and they go out to individual agencies, help them develop the project as well as the financing plan, and then also see it through where the state follows on and acts really as the energy services company by providing bond funding for the project or financing. And then, of course, the project repays that bond with the savings from the project. Very interesting model. And then the Minnesota Guaranteed Energy Savings Program, some of you may already be familiar with this. This is the more traditional kind of state-led initiative where it does have a suite of technical resources and services for project owners, and it delivers technical, financial, contractual, all the assistance that could be needed to support the implementation of ESPC. And so I see we're already a couple minutes over time. I'd like to just close. I'm sorry about, we will try to get to the questions that you have submitted and respond to you in the materials that we post online. But I would like to thank again our guest speakers, Jim Arwood and Dale Haas from the Energy Services Coalition, for sharing both the interesting research, of course, but their vast ESPC expertise and insights that they were able to apply to analyze that information. If you also receive an email notice about not just the questions and answers, but when the archive of this session is available online. And in the meantime, I invite you, of course, to visit the ESPC Toolkit and to contact me directly to have individual discussions more in depth about any one of those tools. And then please also mark your calendars for the 4th session of this ESPC Toolkit series, scheduled for July 12th at the same time. And we'll be discussing the next section, which is expanding ESPC to specific sectors or categories of buildings. And there we hope to share with you some valuable information about using ESPC as a strategy for carrying out energy efficiency projects and targeting them for high savings potential facilities. So thank you very much for attending, everyone, and we do apologize for the technical difficulties. We hope these resources help you establish a strong ESPC infrastructure. Thank you very much.